I'm Bente Torjussen, the Executive Director of AVA Gallery and Art Center. And we are so thrilled to welcome Robert Morgan to this gallery talk and to thank him for letting us have this really extraordinary exhibition here. We were, when our exhibition committee had received we received numerous proposals for exhibitions, and when we looked at your work, we were just astounded. It wasn't just the sheer size of watercolors. I mean, that in itself is most unusual, but it was something about the mystery of the contents, the juxtaposition of the elements, and we all of us were so thrilled that you found, that you submitted, and there was a unanimous enthusiasm for having you come and exhibit here. And I have to say, we are also very pleased that we have the gallery spaces. We have a company to work on this scale. Yeah. And I think I have to say, whether it's, it becomes a space as well. And I saw last night at the opening, there were numerous conversations here in front of your paintings, and I found myself walking around over and over again and being taken by different elements, and there are many different conversations that also go on inside of each of your work. So thank you for that. And Margaret Jacobs, our exhibition coordinator, is the one who was responsible for the installation and has done a wonderful job, like she has with all of the other exhibitions too. One of your fellow co-exhibitors is here also, Everett Weber, who has his watercolors on display in the E.N. Wenberg Gallery. And for those who have not been here before, I encourage you to go around and look at the other works. Ingrid Ellison's paintings in the Entry Gallery, where you mentioned Everett's, and of course then it is in the Elizabeth May Gallery. We have the remarkable prints by another printmaker, Sabra Fee. So with that, I want to say, come here, Margaret, give a formal introduction of this wonderful artist, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Margaret Jacobs, AVA's exhibition coordinator. I'm going to introduce Robert. Robert Morgan of Petersburg, New York, received his bachelor's from Providence College in Rhode Island and held his graduate studies at San Francisco State in California. He received a New York State Arts Foundation grant and has held an artist residency at McDowell Colony in Peterborough, New Hampshire. Recent solo exhibitions include shows at the Earlville Opera House Gallery in New York and McCoy Gallery at Merrimack College in North Andover. Morgan's work has been featured in numerous group exhibitions, including Global Perspectives at Worcester State University in Massachusetts, Berkshire Salon at Eclipse Mill Gallery in North Adams, Massachusetts, and works on paper at Berkshire Museum in Pittsburgh, Massachusetts. Robert Morgan's early interest in art was fueled by the rich traditions of the Berkshire's Hudson Valley region. In his work, Morgan tries to stretch the watercolor medium with respect to content, technique, and scale, reversing the precious attributes usually associated with watercolor as a medium. Please join me in welcoming Robert.
Well, thank you. You both stole my thunder. Thank you, Bente, Margaret. It's really nice to be here at this venue. It's such a great thing for the community to have such a place to bring everybody together for the arts, and I'm completely impressed, and it's wonderful to be here. So thank you for having me. I'm blessed to have with me my lovely wife and great artist Penny Bradley, and my friends Marge and Rich, who are great artists themselves. So thank you for joining here. Excuse me while I get some notes, because Penny would give me a hard time. She'll say, "Oh, you should have said this." So I'm going to try to.
Try not to heckle.
Yeah, she's not going to heckle. First of all, a little history, I guess. I grew up in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, and there's a rich arts history in that area, and also its proximity to the Hudson Valley and the Hudson School there. I was lucky enough to have some museums in that area that I was exposed to as a kid, and for example, the Clark Museum, which has some. It's grown now, but back then it was a small collection of but really nice paintings, and I was exposed to watercolors like Homer and Sargent and the like, and obviously the Hudson School area artists as well. So I grew up with that in my mind, and I wasn't really thinking I would be an artist back then. Even though I was class artist in 3rd grade, I wasn't really thinking of it as a passion. I actually went to undergraduate school for mathematics, and I took a semester off halfway through because I was thinking, well, mathematics isn't really my thing. And I took a semester off and traveled throughout Europe, and I saw so much great art, ending a long trip in Paris, where back then the Impressionists were in the Louvre at the time. And I ended up with seeing Monet's Water Lilies there, and then a number of Van Goghs that just knocked me off my feet. So Van Gogh is one of my favorite artists, and I've gotten a lot of inspiration from seeing his work. Penny and I have gone on sojourns to, birthplaces and burial places, and everywhere in between, and really enjoyed that. I suppose some other influences, although you wouldn't expect it from my work, is Kandinsky, a Russian abstract painter. To me, is one of the greatest ever. And even though I'm not an abstract painter, I can appreciate the sense of design and color and even emotions. Emotions are important for me, but they are also to Kandinsky. It's essential to Kandinsky's work. And more modern influences, maybe Anselm Kiefer, the German artist. A lot because of the scale, where he had giant paintings with often confrontational images in the large pieces, and so perhaps I've borrowed a little of that concept from Anselm Kiefer as well. And the materials, they're so dense and rough, and I tend to do that a little myself. To me, art shouldn't be boring. And I don't know, a lot of trends in modern art tend to be cool, and let's call them one-liners in some way, and to me, I'm not getting an emotional reaction to that. I think you have to hit on an emotional tone with a viewer, and I try to do that by creating a resonance, contrasting things that don't necessarily go with each other, to create that friction, and giving the viewer access to symbols that they may react differently to the various symbols, but they'll react somehow to a symbol, and then I'd like to put that with other symbols and create those emotions that way. I like to contrast hard and soft, warm and cool, images out of scale, like that. Different eras, different everything, different shapes, confrontational shapes in front of soft shapes. So I like to, like I said, I like to evoke emotions by pairing those different symbols. Some of them may even be cliched, like that one over there of Rio. That's a cliched view of Rio de Janeiro, the beach there, and perhaps a cliched picture of an ice hut in New England. And obviously they don't go together at all. Somewhere between the front and the back, the ice turned to water, but I don't know how that's quite happening, but I'm hoping that evokes something in the viewer. The paintings themselves, I don't know if everybody noticed, but they're collaged. So each layer is cut out and glued together to the other layers. For one reason for that is that the paper doesn't come this big. Watercolor paper, the biggest you can find it, I can find it, is 51-inch rolls of Arches watercolor paper. So if you want to be bigger than that, you have no choice, you have to collage. But it also helped me be very soft behind it. I couldn't possibly do a wash like that behind here by going, like that. So I had to paint that in one 10-minute thing. Because watercolor paper dries so quickly that I had, 10 minutes to do this sky. So I couldn't possibly go like that, It wouldn't have that same fluidity and texture, I guess. So, as you can also see, I introduce other elements besides watercolor on paper. That one has asphalt in it. This one has rusty metal. The one back there has little twigs and pieces of the tops of wine covers and tin foil in that one as well. One thing about, Margaret was talking about it, is I do try to push this medium. Most watercolors that we've all sort of grown up to know are very delicate, small, sometimes sentimental. I try to break that in every way that I can. The scale, so I have some that are perhaps 3 times the size of these. And they can't be framed, they're just too big, they're in big rolls. Just to sort of let the viewer enter into, you don't enter into watercolors generally, and that's what I'm trying to allow the viewer to be a part of it, the environment of the watercolor. Then I cover them all with UV varnish because they're too big to put glass over them. So I want to protect them from the sun. So they're covered with varnish. They're all glued to stretch canvas on a stretcher frame and then framed like this, like you would a normal stretch canvas painting. So I think, I can, if that wants to follow me, I was thinking I'd just go around to each one and talk a little bit about what I see going on in each of them, and jump in anytime with any questions or comments or something. This one I tried to counter. Well, I don't know if you know, this building is where most of the watches in America were produced, in this one building back at the turn of the century. And it was all part of the birth of the industrial nation. But this is called the Waltham Watch Factory. So it's very solid. It's been there forever. It's a symbol of industrialization. And I'm countering that with kind of a whimsical pop symbol of plastic flamingos. They're transient. They're even moving. If you see these bent wires down here, they're sort of walking across there, being held in a little bit by this dilapidated wire, roadside wire, I guess. But I'm trying to contrast this whimsical side to this solid, steady factory. And they seem a little concerned too.
Yes.
This is a cedar that we saw in Belgium, and I put it in next to this rock field that we found. Later we went to where in France was the Carnival. Yeah, this were in Provence, but it's very similar to megaliths we saw in Carnac that were prehistoric. But there are all these things about this big sticking out of it. This might have been a fake version of that, I don't know. But the point is, this cedar can't possibly be used to seed this field. So there's this war going on, this contrast between an unseedable field and this old rusting piece of machinery. Yet somehow it's maintaining its majesticness, I think. And again, this rusty metal is supposed to connect with this cedar that is no longer viable. And I also try to, even though there's some conflict in most of the paintings, I try to give the viewer a way out. So the sun-dappled soft trees and this light sky is a way for the viewer to exit the painting, I think, without getting involved in that conflict.
I like the way the great object seems to be floating. I mean, it's sort of, elevated.
Yeah.
And then those rocks are so rocky. I mean, it's a marvelous juxtaposition, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Since it's up on these things,
Right.
it's exposing these blades, but they would get trashed by these rocks if they tried to work with it in that context. We were in Avignon, France, and the Palace of the Popes is where we were. It was the original place for the Vatican before Rome, and they were doing repair work. So all this sort of pink marble was piled up in there, and I was fascinated by the color and also the fact that it was just all piled up there and on this one little pallet or two pallets. And I thought, I put it in this carport in New Orleans. And maybe you wouldn't know it's New Orleans just from looking at it. But it's just the symbol of New Orleans to counter that, to me, is provide that contrast that I was talking about. And here, this is soft, and you can see some people in the background. That's the exit out of this painting, perhaps.
There's something really wonderful about the lights. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I just love those hanging lights, the way they receive that.
Oh yeah, this is actually asphalt that I got from the street outside my studio. It had piled up along the side of the driveway, and I just incorporated that into the acrylic paint that I was using for this base. This one right here is Argentine horse at Mexican Carnival. We lived in Argentina for 3 years, and while we were there, we were treated to authentic gaucho experience, where they had just a minute before I took this picture, they had just castrated that horse, and hence it's a little wild-eyed. but then I tried to play on that sort of emotion of perhaps of that horse by showing this kind of confined, wrapped up picture of a Mexican carnival, or pieces to what was a defunct Mexican carnival. So it's corroding, it's kind of wrecked, but the important thing is that everything's covered and held in, and you know, sort of prophylactic. You know, it's kind of ties to the castration a little bit, I think, of the horse. But again, the way out is the soft sky and the peaceful mountains, so you can exit the painting if you want that.
Robert?
Yes.
Was that was that an actual scene, or was this? Did you create the what's there?
No, these are all actual. I take photographs.
Okay, that's what I was
I use the photographs to do the drawings.
Okay.
Then I cut out that particular one, but the sources are all different. This is obviously out of scale. This was one photograph. This was another. This was another. This was another. So all four were from different places.
What's happening with the front leg of the horse to the left there?
This one,
Yeah.
it's just corroded. It's
Okay.
old. It wasn't really. I wouldn't call it a carnival. I don't know what would it was, but it was just. We just happened to lie in it.
They had taken the carnival, the wooden things apart, and they were just putting them in storage and wrapping them up. And
Yeah.
I got covering the wooden horses, are sort of a reminder of the infertility health of
Yeah.
the wood horse.
Robert, you get all this amazing different shapes you have going on in that picture. I mean, you've got the pole in the front, and then the steeple in the back. You've got the legs coming down at a different shape, the head showing out. It looks like the green giant behind, and he fits right in. Seriously, I mean, it's just amazing. It's just amazing.
Well, actually, for the first time in my life, I have two shows going on at the same time. Penny and I have a duo show in Pittsburgh right now, and one of the paintings I have in the show is the mast pike at the bottom and a giant out of scale carousel, French carousel above it, almost like heaven. You know, it fills the whole sky, so it's really out of scale. Margaret was saying, are you going to show slides? I didn't think of that. I could have. I would like to have shown some of the other paintings too, but I didn't know that was an option.
Does the show in Pittsburgh have, is there a site that would show the work or anything?
Yeah, don't know. Probably
I
not.
don't
It's
think
Point
they have-
Park University.
It's a Point Park University. There was a very nice article in the Pittsburgh Tribune, which is online still, but
Oh,
it
yeah.
doesn't have everything. to
Yeah,
show.
sure.
So,
So this contradiction is obvious. You know, you can't have ice fishing at the beach. But again, both sort of cliched images, which I don't really mind being cliched at times. You know, that's okay. But somewhere in between here, the ice turns to water, and all the people on the beach. It's kind of frolicking in the surf. It's
All the colored parcels, just that line, right in the middle section of the piece where there's not so much color.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really nice.
Yeah, and this is acrylic. You can probably tell that I do include acrylic in a lot of places. So it's not solely watercolor that we have here. This one, kind of different from the rest of them, but these rocks are from a place in France, Gogh, France, and they made houses in, I don't know what the timing was, not prehistoric, it was more recent, but they had houses and hedges throughout the town made with these just piled rocks like that. And I like the contrasting shapes. This was from a sculpture of a resident at McDowell Colony in New Hampshire when I was there, and I like all this sort of diagonals to counter this really syrupy, sweet pink sky. In this case, these strong shapes and contrasts are the counter to this sweet and soft sky. It's a dense sky though, so it hints at some sort of danger, even though it's sweet. So, and then this one finally, I just finished this one. This is flooding Charles River with jets. So in this case, you would think normally that the water would be the main focus, the main center of attention. Yet I'm countering that with all this rubbish that was piled up on the walkway as a result of it flooding in these jets. So there's another sort of danger. So there's two dangers: the danger of the jets, the danger of the flooding, and these people are just sort of, cruising along with their heads, straight forward. They're not fazed by it. So there's that sort of tension going on. And I haven't used balsa wood since I was a kid making airplanes, and now I've got that included in here as well. Just to give it that sense of coming out from the page.
The strong horizontal, it doesn't dominate. I mean, normally a painting with that much of a horizontal thrust, but you've got all these wonderful things happening. There's so much intrigue happening in it that you're not really, I don't know quite how to say it, but it's an intriguing painting, very intriguing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think people are fascinated by moving water. So
Yes.
I did feel I was successful at sort of capturing that, and it's hard to take your eyes off of that sometimes.
Right.
So the attention can bounce back and forth
Exactly.
between them.
I love the light in the paintings and the way it kind of diffuses some of the conflict or juxtaposition of the images. It does give you a kind of escape.
Yeah,
But I'm also
thank you.
wondering, lot of thoughts and feelings and ways of viewer, but could you say any more about where they come from? Whether you
I wish I knew.
always see things, interesting ways as a kid or something?
I wish I knew. Like I said before, I take a lot of photographs, and I'm going through the photographs, and I say, oh, I'm intrigued by this image, and okay, well, what can I pair it with that's sort of going to counter it or endorse it or whatever, and then I'll project it on the wall to look at and see and decide. And sometimes I'm actually doing a part of it before I know the other part. So it sometimes happens. It evolves, yeah. And Penny's always saying, well, she's drawn to do a painting about something, but when she's doing it, she doesn't quite know why at the time, and then afterwards it's obvious. So I do that too sometimes. But some of them, even when I'm done, I don't know. Still don't know what it's really about.
It's a great gift from the past.
Yeah.
Why do you work in watercolor, particularly?
That's interesting. Well, because I grew up liking them, and when I first started painting, I was doing watercolor. And it's interesting you bring that up, because I was in my 20s, and everybody was saying, everybody who wanted to give me advice would say, oh, no, don't do watercolors, it's not serious, you have to do oils, you know. And then after a while I said, no, you know, I like watercolor. I would stay with it, I don't care what people think.
It's interesting because they are the scale of oil paintings, but the watercolor definitely brings something to the feeling of the painting that you could never get it with oil.
I still am in love, even though some of them are harsh and confrontational or edgy, I still love the sensual quality of watercolor and the fluidity and the luminosity of it. You can't beat it, yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to duplicate other medium.
Yes.
I was just wondering, maybe you might say that you have, he has worked in oils and acrylics and
Yeah, I
he's
did-
done
I did
sculptures
try.
and welding, and then came back to this was
Yeah.
really what was right for you, is for all
Yeah.
artists, you know, you know what's right for you. But he has tried them all.
Yeah.
It's always great to see watercolor
Yeah.
used differently.
Yeah.
So it isn't cute or tame or tiny. I love seeing it so big.
Yes.
Dave, new for you is this kind of juxtaposition that has happened here? Is that typical of your work?
It
Is the
is.
size new? Or how
No.
does this fit into your?
Maybe, maybe 25 years I've been doing this size or larger. That's probably one of my smallest paintings. That is probably the smallest painting. So I have one that's French cow on vacation in Italy, and it's 174 inches. So it would fill
Mural.
most of that wall over there. So I guess really that's all I have. Do you have any other questions or comments?
Do you have a huge palette you work off? I mean, how do you actually, in your studio, when you're working,
Well,
when you're doing it in segments, I know, but still they're big segments that you're working on.
yeah, well, to do a wash
Yeah.
like this, like I said, I have to do it in 10 minutes before it dries. So I have to have all the paint mixed up completely, and so I overcompensate because I can't run out of that before I'm done. So I have a lot of plastic cups and I squeeze a half a tube of watercolor paint into it, mix it up like a syrup, and then I go from there. So that's my palette, is a bunch of plastic cups. And I have to work on the floor most of the time because it'll drip, so I have to work on the floor. And actually, that large one I was telling you about, I did the parts of it with a mop. Because I really, to cover 12, 15, or 14 feet, I had to, before it dried, so.
Is that in your show, or is that that big?
No, that one's on my website, but not in the show in Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'll give you a card.
Oh, yeah.
And then we happen to have 11 layers collage,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
And would you talk a little bit about though how many layers of paint? Because it's not that you just paint it once and it's done. You keep layering.
Yeah, well, for those that know watercolor, yes, this was just one wash. This was probably 2 or 3 times that I had to go into it using mascoid or masking fluid as a way to block the color. I probably went into that 2 or 3 times, and then as it gets denser and denser, there may be 6, 7 layers of paint on these parts right here. And at times acrylic added in where I do need that opaqueness. But as Penny said, they're all multi-layered paper and then multi-layered paint as well.
All tubes are just great. I love all of them. Different.
Yeah, isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, it really is.
Very
It's
organic.
very animated.
Yeah.
It's got a life of its own. Where is this college? And because I have a grandson at Carnegie Mellon, he's into electronics. He's pretty involved, but I'd love him to see your work.
Point Park is right downtown.
Point Park.
Point Park University.
Because I think, and he's got all these buddies, and they'd be fascinated.
Yeah. Penny's paintings are wonderful.
Thank you for
Anything
bringing your
else?
work up here.
Oh,
I'm so
thank
glad
you.
to be able to-
I'm so pleased to be here.